Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Avorion episode 21. I'm Enigmius and today we're taking the Samson build in a different direction. It happens sometimes. We get started with an idea, a very general idea, and we kind of play it out for a little while. And in this case, I wasn't really satisfied with the direction that we were taking. Now, unlike when we kind of gutted and redid the spirit, this one isn't going to take 2 or 3 episodes just to get back to where we were. What I want to do in this episode is lay out the profile that I had in mind for the revamped version of the ship. And then in the next episode, we'll basically be able to pick up and make progress. And the ship will be farther ahead at the end of the next episode than it was when we ended off the last episode. That's generally the idea that I'm going for. Now, one of the key things that I had in mind for this build is that I wanted to have sort of like a skeleton for the ship that was made up of really beefy, large structural elements, so that as the ship took damage, you wouldn't find yourself in a situation where you'd potentially lose a great big chunk of the ship because you just had these flimsy little connections and they weren't really able to hold the ship together. And as we were getting into builds with more sort of exterior facing structural elements, like with the Malapis, we had sort of like nacelles kind of sticking out the sides, and we had different components and things that were branching off from the main hull of the ship, but on a much smaller scale. In this case, we're going to be working sort of in a larger scale, and I don't want those parts of the ship to just kind of fall off after a little bit of concentrated enemy fire in the right spot. So that's sort of one of the keys that we're going to be working with, getting everything laid out here. But in terms of the actual profiles of the ship, you can see we're starting in, and we're being attacked by pirates, but we're building in creative and the ship is set to invulnerable. So all they can really do is occasionally, when they hit us hard enough, our ship will start to rotate a little bit, but they can't really damage it, which is a very appreciated time-saving sort of feature that we don't have to worry too much about what happens when the pirates and the aliens decide to target us for their abuse. Now you can see we're basically building a circle. And one of the things that I wanted to do with this particular profile is work with something that was a square on one end. And you can see we're building out of essentially a long skinny rectangle that's a square at one end. And the benefit of doing this is it means that I can use sites like plots.co.uk, which, if you've been following my voxel building adventures over the different games where I built things in voxels, is my go-to site for all things circles and ellipses and their 3D equivalents, where I want them to look uniform and relatively accurate. So that was one of the things that I wanted to do, and in order to do that, I needed to be working with squares. So I set up this specific block shape. It's got a square on one end, it's extended on the other planes, so we don't have to worry as much about how little ground we're covering as we're building this. And then using those shapes from plots, and in this case I was using the mobile version, so I had the shape on my phone. I didn't have to tab back and forth to the full desktop version. It made it much easier to kind of keep an eye on what I was doing. And then it just became a case of deciding exactly what I wanted and where I was going to lay it out, and exactly what support elements that I needed to put into place, even if only temporarily, so that I could attach everything to the ship the way that I wanted it. And then we'll go through the process of refining and finishing the basic profile. And once all that's done, then we fill in between the profiles and most of the ship is complete. After that, we just have to take a look at some of the details that we might want to add, just for the aesthetic, the visual interest kind of thing. So this top section is another circle. It's a little bit larger than the ones that we've got on the ends. And it's basically just going to come down until it meets up with that horizontal line that we just put into place. And then kind of smooth out a little bit, flatten out. And that will become the basic central profile for the majority of the ship's hull. And we're going to basically be doing the same thing, the same shape on the underside as well. We haven't gone down there yet. We're kind of goofing around a little bit, getting the thing laid out the way that we need it. Once we've got all of the layout done, it makes a lot of sense in this case to go around and remove all of these structural bits that we put into place just to support the building of the profile. Just because the more that I end up working with on the screen at a time, all the different shapes, all the different lines, all the different profiles coming together, the more there are, the more distracting they become. So if a particular piece that we put in just to hold things together while we build around it has served its purpose, sometimes the best thing we can do is just clear it out of the way, and then we can continue on with everything else that we have to do. And we can it's easier to stay focused on the things that are actually important, as opposed to the mind briefly kind of wondering if there's something that we need to be using those pieces for, or if we can get rid of them. So one of the important features that I wanted to take advantage of in order to smooth off these profiles is the merge feature, where you can select blocks that are similar and merge them together into one block. Because we've done this layout basically what amounts to all these little squares, and in a lot of cases they're stacked side by side to create rectangular shapes as part of these circular profiles. And I wanted to go through and join a lot of these rectangular profiles together so that we could go around with the slope blocks and, using the match feature, have an easy time of smoothing things out, making the outer edge, the outer part of the profile, smooth and uniform and kind of looking in line with what I had in mind. So you can see now we've got sort of like a rough pixely sort of profile. By the time we're done, that will be smoothed off. And it's one of those things, it's actually very, very satisfying when you have an opportunity to kind of put something together in a way that you set yourself up for success, something that could have been a very long and painstaking process. With just a little bit of thought ahead of the actual act of putting it into place, it goes from quite a chore to something that's actually much easier to deal with than it ever had to be. So that's kind of a cool way that the game is set up to allow you to do that. It's just a matter of getting everything in our head, remembering what tools are available to us and what we can do with them. And in this case, you can see we're just sort of putting everything together, highlighting specific blocks, using the merge feature, group them together. There are going to be some blocks that are left out of this merging process. Most of those will be removed, again, as basically temporary blocks that we put in place just so that we can build everything. We can't remove them now because they're still necessary to hold everything together. But once we put the slope blocks in place to smooth everything off, then we'll be able to get rid of them. And we'll be left with a nice clean profile that we can then fill in with larger blocks and continue with that theme that we had with the original version of the ship, where we had a lot of interior equipment that was jammed together and then built around so that we had a nice thick protective layer all the way around it. That's not something that I wanted to set aside. That's definitely not something that I wanted to give up as a part of this rework. So it's just a question of getting the profiles set up first, and then we can sort of fill them in, get everything in place the way that we want it, and move forward, hopefully with a ship that's better off than what we originally had before we decided to rework it. One of the things that's important to remember, you can see how quickly this is going to go now. We've merged everything together. We can just use the match feature, make sure the slope is oriented properly, and then just bang, bang, bang. It just goes very, very quickly. One of the things that is very important to remember with the merge feature is that it doesn't work across the mirror plane. So this side of the ship that we were working on, this side here, merging all the blocks together, if we were to go over to the other side, all of those little blocks would not be merged. So when it comes time to place all these little sloped blocks, as long as we stay on this side of the ship, the mirror feature will work to copy the slope blocks over to the other side, the same size that we're placing them. Everything's going to finish up just fine, but those little blocks on the other side are not going to be merged, and that's going to be something that we can do later, is just select them all and then use the merge feature and basically click on it until it stops flashing, is the way that I look at it. That will give us that little bit more robust kind of thing, merging them together, but it's not going to be the same as when we do it here, where we basically select all of the blocks individually and merge them together strategically so that they fit the way that we want them to, and they work with the slopes the way that we want them to make them the right size very easily with the match feature, etc., etc. So that's just the one thing that I wanted to pass along if you're just kind of getting started, is that reminder. Now we're just going to highlight these and use the merge feature because why not? But it's not going to be the same as the ones that we laid out on the other side. The match feature works just fine across the mirror plane. The merge doesn't. So just remember that. Now I'm basically going around and removing all of those little blocks that no longer have a place. Everything is being held together now between the blocks that we merged and the slope blocks that we put on top of them. That's all we need to hold this profile together. We don't need these little extra blocks anymore, so we're going to get rid of those. And again, it's just a part of clearing out the things that we don't need so that we have fewer issues later on, not only with the distraction, but also if we've got those little blocks in the way, we're either going to have to remove them later when we've got something in mind that we would rather be doing, or we're going to leave them in place and it's going to have a disruptive impact on what we're going to be building around them. So just get them out of the way and it'll be a little bit easier to work with. So now, sort of the final shape that we'll be adding to this specific profile is another circle, and this will be kind of like in a cell. So we've got the main central hull area, which is kind of like the wavy circles that are built together, and then we've got sort of this outrigger sort of effect, that beam that's sticking out the side, and now we've got a circle that we're basically going to be working all the way around and attaching to that beam on the top and the bottom. We'll do the same thing. We'll merge the blocks together, put the slopes in place, remove the temporary blocks, and that will be basically the main sort of key profile that will be defining the shape of the ship. The front will be, you know, we have a certain amount of liberty to do what we want out of the front and the back of this profile. But as you'll see, once we finish off with the circle, we're actually going to duplicate this profile a couple of times along the central sort of beam that's down the middle of the ship. And that's going to be defining the majority of the ship's profile, and everything that we build in between will be fairly low-key, fairly uniform, very similar to the profiles we're making now, just offset a little bit. But then the front and the back is where we'll have an opportunity to do things a little bit more unique and a little bit different compared to what's going on with the rest of the ship. And then, like I say, once that's all done, then we can go back around and start looking at the details that we can add just to make the ship look a little bit better once we've put in all of this time and effort to making all these circles and curves. I just have a thing for circles and curves. There's something very satisfying about building with them and having them actually work out. And there are times when I can do a freehand circle or an ellipse and I can be happy with the outcome. There are times when I have no problem whatsoever cheating, if some people want to look at it that way, just to kind of get, when I say it's a circle, it's a circle. That's basically the outcome. I can't say that I did it freehand, I can't say I did it myself, but I can say it's a circle, and sometimes that's just kind of a cool thing to be able to say about one of your ships, is it's got a circle built right into it. And I built that ship even if I didn't come up with the exact layout and placement and profile for that circle on my own. So it's coming together fairly quickly. We're just kind of, and again, we're just sort of extending that beam as far as we can. We're just adding basically health to that central beam that's extending from the center out to the outer edges. Once we put that little stubby guy on the very end, we merged it with what was already in place, and that puts us in a position where we've got these really robust sort of skeletal elements like I was talking about that will hopefully increase the longevity of the ship, because it is going to be pretty wide. It's going to be, like I say, probably wider than it is long. And now this particular task wound up being a little bit more challenging than I expected it to be, in large part because we've got that central beam running down the middle of the ship, and then we've got the beams going out the side. The way that they're laid out, with the beam that's already there going from side to side and the central beam, is that they're actually overlapped, and you can't really see it very easily, but they are, and that means trying to just copy and paste the shape that you're adding when you have to overlap it again in order for it to line up the way that it's supposed to. Sometimes the game doesn't really want to cooperate as much as you might like, so we had to be a little bit careful We had to put some blocks into place that we could place things against when we were lining them up in order for them to actually work the way that they're supposed to. And then, as sort of a kick to the junk, when we finally got everything all lined up and set up the way it was supposed to, you can see only one half copied. And that's because one of the blocks that we copied, actually two of the blocks that we copied are the ones in the very middle of that profile. And because we copied them, when one went into place, it tried to put the other half in place, but there was an overlap again because those blocks in the middle were basically too wide. So it would only copy the one half. So we had to go back, remove what we had just placed, copy everything that we had except for those middle blocks, line it up again, place it, and then put the middle blocks into place after the fact. So you can see there's going to be a little bit of a gap when we first place it in the top and the bottom of that profile. We'll just fill that in once we got everything where we need it to be. So good progress for basically a complete rebuild. I'm glad I kind of made the decision early. I don't know 100% with this build what I'll be doing, but I already like the direction that it's going. At the very least, it'll be interesting, potentially hideous, but interesting. And we're going to continue on with the build in the next episode. There's just a minute or so left that you can kind of watch putting the last little bits into place. So if you want to be notified about the next episode, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.